This is Math 3 2.5 notes. That's Math 3, Unit 2, Lesson 5. The title is Solve Quadratic Equations. Make sure you put your name and period in the upper right hand corner. And first thing we're going to do is solve the following quadratic equations for x. Okay, how this is going to change from what we just did in the previous lesson is now we're going to have some that have imaginary solutions, so we're going to be using our I, and we're going to be using the quadratic formula. Okay, so number 1, 3 parentheses x plus 2 quantity squared plus 7 equals -8. If you will remember, in class I said if it's just a quantity squared and no other variables, you are going to isolate and square root. Okay, this is not a factor and solve. It doesn't say factor and solve, it just says solve. There's different ways of solving. And I told you in a previous lesson that if you have a quantity squared and no other variables, you're going to get this guy isolated. And we've done a few of these together. You're going to subtract 7 first. That gives you 3 times the absolute value of x plus 2, not absolute value, sorry. The quantity of x plus 2 squared equals -15 because you're adding together two negatives. And then we also talked in class that you never distribute a number into a quantity squared or absolute value, so we're going to divide both sides by 3. And that gives you x plus 2 quantity squared equals -5. All right, now what we're going to do is square root both sides, and we square root both sides to undo the exponent because square roots and squares undo each other. They don't cancel each other out, they undo each other. So it is gone. I have x plus 2 equals, don't forget your plus or minus. Now 5 is prime. When you break it down, no pairs come out, but if you remember from last year, the square root of a negative, an I comes out and the root 5 stays. Plus or minus I root 5. All right, we're going to subtract the 2 to the other side because we're still trying to get x by itself. And they're not like terms. We did talk about that in class as well. The way you're going to write this is -2 plus or minus I root 5. And that there is your final answer. I'll talk in class about another way to write this with the root 5 before the I, but we'll talk about it in class. For now, write it like this every time. Okay, number 2. The quantity of x plus 1 times the quantity of x plus 5 equals 3. Now, we've talked about this in class as well, and I told you then in class that it's not the 3 product property or the 5 product property, it's a 0 product property. So we're going to have to double distribute, subtract the 3, and then factor and solve. How do I know it's not one of these problems? Because there's no quantity squared. Okay, so let's go ahead and double distribute. X times x is x squared plus 5x. The next thing I'm going to distribute is the 1. 1 times x is 1x plus 5. And then equal 3 we will subtract over on the next step. Okay, I'm going to combine like terms. X squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 3. We are going to subtract the 3. Why? Because 0 product property is what I want to use. Okay, so I get x squared plus 6x plus 2 equals 0. All right, look for a GCF first. There's no GCF. So we're going to try to factor, but it does not factor. It does not factor. So what the heck do I do if it doesn't factor? We're going to use, if you remember from last year's math class, what we call the quadratic formula. And I will write it down for you. It looks like this. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That is the quadratic formula. Now you can use this on any quadratic equation, even if it's factorable. We tend to use it when something doesn't factor, but even if it did factor, you could still use this. You could have even used it over here. If you had double distribute the 3, at the 7, at the 8, it's a lot more work, but it would have worked the same. Okay, so again, you can use this on any quadratic, anything that has an x squared in it. You see how there's an x squared, there's an x squared. But we tend to use it whenever something does not factor. And there's no factors of 2 that will add up to 6. So we're forced to use this here. Your teacher may have sang it to you last year. I'm going to work it out. First thing I'm going to do is write down what my A, B, and C are. A is 1, B is 6, C is 2. And I am going to plug it in. X equals, I'm going to do it like this first. Opposite parentheses plus or minus the square root of blank squared minus 4 blank blank all over 2 blank. And just kind of get the skeleton is what I call it, the skeleton of it down, and then fill in the blanks as we go. Okay, so B goes there, so B is 6, so 6 and 6. A goes in those 2 spots there, and A is 1 and 1, and C only goes at the end, and C is 2. Okay, so we had some of these on our previous worksheet. Opposite of 6 is negative 6. If this were a negative, that would become positive 6. But it wasn't. It was a positive 6, and the opposite of positive 6 is negative 6. Plus or minus the square root of 6 squared is 36. 4 times 1 times 2 is 8. And since there's only a minus and no other negatives, it's going to be minus 8 over 2. Remember, you cannot reduce those. Cannot reduce those. Okay. This gives me negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 take away 8 is 28 over 2. Now, I still cannot reduce because this is a negative 6, this is a 1, and that is a 2. And there's no number that divides into all of them evenly. But if you remember, I can break down the 28. I'm going to at least try. What goes into 28? 2 and 14. 2 and 7. So the 2 comes out, so 2 root 7 is what you have. So negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 2. All right, how did I get the 2 root 7? The square root of 28 broke up to 2 times 7. The 2 came out. The root 7 stayed in. Now take a look. Negative 6, 2, and 2. Sorry, I wasn't in screen, so let me pick that up. Negative 6 plus 2 root 7 over 2. Can I reduce? And I can reduce because I can divide everything by a 2. So this becomes a negative 3, this becomes a 1, and that becomes a 1. You do not have to write a 1 in the denominator. It's okay if you do. You get negative 3 plus or minus 1 root 7 is just root 7. If you put the 1 there, that's okay. All over 1 is not necessary. If you put it there, it is okay. All right, now I know that feels like a lot, but this is definitely something you will need to be able to do on your own eventually. Okay, I'm going to move on now to number 3. Number 3 is 3x squared minus 11x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, it's not like number 1 because number 1 had the quantity squared. That's not like that. So this is going to be one where we factor and solve. It already equals 0. It already equals 0, so I don't have to move anything over. All right, so here's what you do. You ask yourself, can I factor? Now, once you become really good at factoring, it's going to be a little easier to check. If you feel like, oh my goodness, there's no way I can figure out if this is factorable, you can just go to this and be okay. All right, I'm going to try to factor it first because for me, factoring's easier than this. Some of you might feel like this is easier, so go for it if that's what you want to do. I'm going to try to factor and only use this if I have to. I would suggest you hit pause and either try to factor or go straight to this and see if we end up with the same answer. Hit play when you're done. All right, I'm going to double bubble. I'm trying to factor first. 3 is prime, so 3x and 1x. I know it's going to be plus minus or minus plus. I'll fix it later at the end if I have to. 1, 4 or 4, 1. If I put it like this, 4, 1, that's a 4 and that's a 3. That's not going to give me the 11. So I'm going to put the 1 here and the 4 here. That's 1x and that's negative 12x. That indeed adds up to the negative 11x. So it did factor. Now, if you're just hitting play and you're like, oh, I couldn't get it to factor, I used quadratic, that is okay. We should end up in the same spot at the end. Okay, and if you did factor, then you're with me. 3x plus 1 equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. Subtract the 1 and divide the 3. You end up with a fraction. In this one, you simply just add the 4 and you end up with the whole number. X equals negative 1/3, comma 4, no parentheses because it is not an ordered pair. It's not a coordinate, it's 2 separate x values. All right, if you use quadratic, you should end up with the same answers. If you did the quadratic and you didn't come up with the same answers, you can ask me in class and we'll discuss how to fix it. Okay, number 4. The quantity of x plus 8 squared minus 7 equals 0. And I'm going to change that 0. It should have been a 5. So if you will please change yours as well. That should have been equals 5 and not a 0. All right. What you're going to do here is, you see how it's a quantity squared. We've talked about those. Because it's a quantity squared, we are going to isolate the quantity squared and square root both sides. I'm hoping you recognize those by now. So add the 7. That gives you x plus 8 quantity squared equals 12. And then square root both sides. And we talked in class about being able to change it to just plus or minus from now on. So undo each other. X plus 8 equals plus or minus. Now root 12, I'm going to take care of that now. Root 12 can break up 4 and 3. 4 is 2 and 2. So I have 2, 2, and a 3. The 2 comes out, the 3 stays in. Plus or minus 2 root 3. Subtract the 8. And they are not like terms. I apologize for my doggy barking. X equals negative 8 plus or minus 2 root 3. They are not like terms. This is as far as I can go. All right, I'm going to give you another one. Number 5. X times the quantity of x minus 5 equals 8. Now this is just like number 2. I'm going to have to distribute and then subtract, but instead of double distribution, it's just single distribution. X squared minus 5x, I'm going to minus the 8 over, minus 8 equals 0. All right, I am going to have you finish this one on your own. It does not factor. Try as you might, it does not. So you are going to have to use this. You are going to finish it on your own. I will talk about it in class, but you're turning this in as soon as you finish it. So your number 5, right or wrong, you're turning it in. But I don't want you stopping here. You better have more of it done. I'll at least write it for you. X equals negative parentheses plus or minus the square root of blank squared minus 4 blank blank over 2 blank. You're going to fill it all in. You have the formula there. And you're going to work it out as far as you can. We'll check answers in class, but you are turning this in as soon as you finish this. So you're going to stop the video, you're going to finish it on your own, and turn it in. Right or wrong, you're turning it in, but I want to see how you do this on your own. That is it for this lesson.